For most of this show's run, Kody Brown didn't apologize for much of anything. He explained. He was justified. He told us why he was right and why everyone else needed to understand his perspective. And then, in Season 20, something shifted. Suddenly, Kody was apologizing. To his wives, to his kids, about the past, about his choices. The season has practically been built around it, what people are calling Kody's apology tour. And it's left the entire audience split down the middle on one simple, loaded question. Is Kody Brown finally, genuinely sorry? Or is he just sorry he got caught, running damage control on a reputation in freefall? So tonight, let's put the apology tour under the microscope, because the answer to that question changes how we see this man's entire final act. Let me start by laying out what the apology tour actually consists of, because it's a real and noticeable pattern this season. After years of a Kody who rarely conceded fault, we're now seeing a Kody who acknowledges he made mistakes, who expresses regret about how things turned out, who seems, at least on the surface, to be reaching toward his family with something like contrition. He's apologizing in confessionals, in conversations, in the tell-all. The tone is different. The posture is different. The man who once defended every decision is now, at least in words, owning that some of those decisions caused harm. On its face, that's growth. On its face, it's exactly what people have wanted from him for years. So why is the audience so skeptical? Why isn't everyone just celebrating that Kody finally gets it? And the answer is timing. Because here's the uncomfortable truth about the apology tour. It's arriving after everything has already fallen apart. Kody isn't apologizing while he still has 4 wives and a family to save. He's apologizing after 3 wives have left, after the public has turned against him, after his image has cratered. And that timing matters enormously, because an apology that comes only after you've lost everything raises a fair question. Are you sorry for what you did, or are you sorry for what it cost you? Those are very different things, and the difference is the whole ball game. Let me steelman the genuine reading first, because I want to be fair to the possibility that this is real growth. People do change, often late, often only after loss. Sometimes it takes losing everything for a person to finally see clearly. There's a version of Kody where the collapse of his family was the very thing that broke through his defenses, where watching the wives leave and the kids drift forced him, at last, to confront his own role in it. In that version, the apology tour isn't cynical at all. It's the painful, belated awakening of a man who couldn't see his faults until the consequences became undeniable. And if that's what this is, then we should give him some credit, because late growth is still growth, and it's a lot more than many people ever manage. There's even a poignancy to that reading. Imagine genuinely realizing in your late 50s, surrounded by the wreckage of the family you built, that you were the architect of much of that wreckage. That's a devastating thing to wake up to. The apologies in this light would be the sound of a man finally facing himself, and that's never comfortable to watch, but it can be sincere. Some of the most genuine apologies in life come too late to fix anything, precisely because it took the damage being done for the person to understand what they were doing. So I don't want to dismiss the possibility that Kody means it. He might. People are capable of real, if tardy, reckoning. But now, let me give the skeptical reading its full weight, because it's at least as persuasive. The cynical interpretation is that the apology tour is strategic. Kody is a veteran of reality television. He understands the image. He can surely see that his public standing is in tatters, that the audience has turned, that he's become the villain of his own show. And an apology tour is exactly what a person does to rehabilitate a damaged image. Say sorry, look contrite, soften the edges, win back some sympathy. In this reading, the apologies aren't a reckoning with his conscience. They're a public relations campaign, deployed at precisely the moment when his reputation needs rescuing. And the tell that supports this reading is, again, the timing. The apologies showed up right when they became useful. Here's a test I find clarifying, and I'd encourage you to apply it as you watch. Listen to what Kody actually apologizes for and how. Does he take specific, concrete responsibility? Does he name what he did, acknowledge the harm, and own it without qualification? Or do the apologies stay vague, hedged, wrapped in explanations, somehow always circling back to his own feelings and his own pain? Because a genuine apology centers on the person who was hurt. A performative one centers the person apologizing. If Kody's apologies are full of, "But I was struggling too, and you have to understand my perspective," that's not really an apology. That's a justification for wearing an apology's clothing. And how he threads that needle tells you almost everything about which kind of sorry this is. Let me bring in something we've discussed before because it's relevant here. Remember Kody's admission about Janelle, that he loved her and might still, but that she plays him? Look at the structure of that. Even in a moment of apparent vulnerability, the framing turned his own feeling into someone else's manipulation. That's a pattern. And if that pattern shows up in the apology tour, if the apologies keep finding ways to make his harm somebody else's fault or his own victimhood the real story, then we have our answer. The apology tour in that case isn't a change in character. It's the same character performing a new genre. The words are apologetic. The underlying self-orientation is unchanged. But I want to be careful not to let cynicism become its own kind of laziness, because that's a trap too. It's easy, and satisfying, to declare that Kody can't possibly mean it, that he's irredeemable, that any apology is automatically fake. But that stance is just as unfair as naive acceptance. People are not fixed. The Kody of today is not necessarily the Kody of 10 years ago. To insist he's incapable of any genuine remorse is to deny him the basic human possibility of change. And that's not fairness. That's a grudge. So the honest position isn't to decide in advance that it's fake. It's to watch closely, weigh the evidence, and hold both possibilities until the man's actions, not just his words, tip the scale. And that's really the key, isn't it? Actions, not words. Because apologies are cheap, and actions are expensive. The real test of Kody's apology tour isn't what he says on camera, it's what he does off it. Does he make amends where amends are possible? Does he, for instance, actually pay Meri the money she says she's owed, rather than just expressing regret about it? Does he change how he treats the people still in his life? Does he show up differently for his kids and grandkids? Words of apology followed by changed behavior is repentance. Words of apology followed by the same behavior is performance. We don't have to guess forever. Time and action will reveal which one this is. The apology tour is the claim. The follow-through is the proof. Let me talk about why this matters so much to the audience emotionally, because I think the intensity of the reaction is revealing. People are split on the apology tour because the apology tour asks them to make a decision about forgiveness. And forgiveness is complicated. Part of the audience wants to forgive, wants the story to end with redemption, wants to believe Kody learned and grew, because that's a more hopeful, more humane ending. Another part of the audience feels that forgiveness would be unearned, that letting Kody off the hook because he said sorry after the damage was done would be an insult to the women and children who were hurt. Both impulses come from a good place. One values mercy, the other values justice. And the apology tour forces every viewer to decide, for themselves, which they weigh more heavily. I'll tell you where I land, and I'll be clear that this is my opinion. I think the truth is probably mixed. And I think mixed is the most realistic answer for a real human being. I suspect Kody feels genuine regret and is aware of the image benefits of expressing it. I suspect there's real pain in him and a familiar tendency to make that pain the center of the story. People are rarely purely sincere or purely calculating. They're usually both, tangled together, sometimes without even knowing it themselves. So I don't think the apology tour is entirely fake. But I also don't think it's the clean redemption some hope for. It's the messy, partial, self-interested, possibly sincere reckoning of a flawed man. And that's about as much as any of us should expect. So when I step back and look at Kody's apology tour, here's what I see. I see a man who spent years refusing to apologize, suddenly apologizing, at the exact moment apologies became useful. I see a genuine possibility of late growth tangled up with an equally genuine possibility of damage control. I see a test that comes down not to his words, but to whether his actions ever match them. And I see an audience forced to wrestle with the hardest question of all, whether an apology that arrives only after everything is lost deserves to be believed. I don't think we can answer it from the words alone. We answer it by watching what he does next. The apology tour made the claim. Now Kody has to prove it. And so far, the jury is very much still out. Let me draw a distinction that I think cuts right to the heart of this. The difference between regret and remorse. They sound similar, but they're worlds apart. Regret is when you wish the outcome had been different. Remorse is when you wish you had acted differently. Regret says, I'm sad I lost my family. Remorse says, I'm sorry for the specific things I did that hurt them. Do you hear the difference? Regret is about you and your losses. Remorse is about them and your harm. And the great test of Kody's apology tour is which one he's actually expressing. If he's mourning what he lost, that's regret. And regret is natural, but it's not the same as taking responsibility. If he's reckoning with what he did, that's remorse. And remorse is the real thing. Listen carefully, and you'll usually be able to tell which one a person is really feeling underneath the word sorry. Here's why the after-the-loss timing matters so much through that lens. When you apologize before you've lost everything, while there's still something to save, the apology costs you nothing strategically and gains you something real, a chance to repair the relationship. That's an apology you can mostly trust, because it's aimed at fixing things while fixing is still possible. But an apology that comes only after everything is already gone can't repair anything. The wives have already left, so what is it for? Either it's pure, expecting nothing, which would actually make it more sincere, or it's aimed at the only thing left to gain, which is public image. The timing doesn't prove which, but it sharpens the question. An apology with nothing left to save is either the most honest kind or the most calculated kind. And the difference is entirely in the heart of the person giving it. I think it's worth paying attention to how the wives themselves have responded to the apology tour, because they know Kody better than any of us, and their reactions are data. By and large, the wives have not exactly melted into forgiveness. Meri is still talking about money she's owed. Christine has moved on entirely into her new life. There's a notable lack of the women rushing to embrace Kody's contrition, and that tells you something. The people best positioned to know whether Kody's apologies are sincere, the people who lived with him for decades, don't seem to be treating the apology tour as a breakthrough. They've heard his words before. They know the difference between his apologizing and his changing. Their skepticism from the inside should inform our skepticism from the outside. If the people he's apologizing to aren't convinced, why should we be quicker to believe than they are? We can't ignore the cameras in any of this, because nothing on this show happens without them, and they fundamentally complicate the apology. A private apology, given in a quiet room with no audience, has a certain purity. It's just between the people involved. But Kody's apologies are happening on camera, for broadcast, as content, and that changes their nature. When you apologize knowing millions will watch, you can't fully separate the contrition from the performance, even if you want to. Even a sincere apology delivered on camera becomes partly a public act, shaped by awareness of the audience. So the format itself muddies the water. We literally cannot see a private, unperformed Kody apology because the only ones we get are the ones made for television. And an apology made for an audience is always, at least a little, for that audience. There's a familiar playbook here too that's worth naming, because we've all seen it. The public figure apology tour is practically a genre at this point. A celebrity or politician does something, loses public favor, and then embarks on a carefully managed campaign of contrition. The humble interviews, the emotional admissions, the language of growth and accountability, all designed to rehabilitate their image and win back the crowd. We've seen it enough times to recognize the beats. And the uncomfortable thing is that Kody's apology tour hits a lot of those beats. That doesn't automatically make it fake. Plenty of sincere apologies also follow a recognizable shape. But it does mean we're right to bring some healthy skepticism, because we've been shown this exact performance by enough public figures to know that the form of an apology can be completely separated from the substance of real change. So let me get concrete about what would actually prove this, because vague talk of actions is too easy. What would real amends look like for Kody? Specifically, it would look like paying Meri the money she says she's owed, turning the regret about it into an actual check. It would look like showing up consistently and humbly for the children who've grown distant, not in a single dramatic gesture, but in the slow, unglamorous work of rebuilding trust over years, expecting nothing in return. It would look like respecting the wives' new lives, instead of centering his own feelings about them. It would look like changed behavior, sustained long after the cameras stop rolling, and there's no longer any image to rehabilitate. That last part is the real test. Does the changed Kody persist when nobody's watching and there's nothing left to gain? Because that's the only version of change that was ever real. And here's the thing about that standard. It protects us from both naivety and cruelty. If we demand actions, not words, then we don't have to decide right now whether Kody is sincere. We can simply say, show us. We can extend the possibility of belief while withholding the conclusion until the evidence comes in. That's the fair position. It doesn't slam the door on redemption, because redemption through changed action is always possible. But it doesn't hand out forgiveness for words alone, because words are cheap, and the people he hurt deserve more than a well-delivered apology. We hold the door open, and we wait to see if he actually walks through it. That's not cynicism, and it's not naivety. It's just fairness with a memory. Let me close this part with a thought about forgiveness itself, because ultimately, that's what the apology tour is asking of everyone. The wives, the kids, the audience. Forgiveness is a gift, and it's the wronged persons to give, not the wrongdoers to demand. One of the subtle problems with a public apology tour is that it can put pressure on the hurt parties to forgive, to perform reconciliation for the cameras and the audience, whether or not they're ready. But nobody owes Kody forgiveness on his timeline, just because he's decided to be sorry on television. Real forgiveness, if it ever comes, will come when the people he hurt are ready, on their terms, in response to real change, not in response to a well-produced apology. And until then, their skepticism isn't bitterness, it's self-respect. The apology tour is Kody's to give. The forgiveness is theirs to withhold, for exactly as long as they need to. So I'll put it to you now, because this is exactly the kind of question where I want to hear every side. Do you think Kody's apology tour is genuine, late-arriving growth, or do you think it's strategic damage control timed to rescue his image? And here's the bigger question for the comments. What would Kody actually have to do, not say, do, for you to believe the apologies are real? Tell me, because I genuinely want to know what would move the needle for you. And I read every comment. If you want me to track the apology tour against Kody's actual actions over the coming months, holding his words up against what he really does, let me know, and I'll keep score. And if you appreciate that we neither naively forgive nor lazily condemn, but actually weigh it honestly, then do me a favor and subscribe, because that fairness is the whole point here. And there's so much more of this final act still to watch unfold.